So, Berto, it was 20 years ago that 9/11 happened. September 11th happened in the United States. And I'll tell you what happened to me that day. You tell me what happened to you that day.
But by the way, 20 years?
Yeah.
20 years? Ugh.
I woke up around 8 in the morning, and, that's like 11 a.m. New York time, right?
Yep.
And I turned on the TV, and every channel, both towers had already fallen by that point. And
I think the Pentagon was already hit too.
Right. Yeah. There was all this talk. It was this utter confusion and chaos and worry of, well, we've had a report of one plane hitting it. We've had a report of another plane. We had a report of another plane. We had another report of another. At that point on the news, it was like, at this hour, we have thousands of planes in the air over the United States. How many more dozens of planes are going to come out of the sky and kill people? And it just felt like, and there were rumors that there were other planes, but there weren't, but 4 planes is enough to be terrified of. And I remember looking at the scenes on the news and just how scary and devastating and unnerving it was, and how unreal it felt. And to see, the World Trade Center was arguably one of the most, that skyline, those two
so iconic.
Yeah, it was New York, it was America.
Symbol of permanence too.
Yeah. And
like buildings you don't build those buildings and then take them down, right? Like,
yeah,
they're going to be there.
Right. And they don't just fall because it was just incredible. It was akin to a mountain being gone in terms of the way it felt to me. And as soon as I saw it, within half a second, I knew, I just felt like I knew it. I knew this was going to happen because just a year and a half earlier, it was the 1999 to 2000 New Year's Eve. And I actually left Seattle because there
were threats, right?
Well, or talk of an attack on Seattle or the Space Needle.
Yeah, right. I remember that. I was in Whistler at the time.
And I remember thinking, I want to get out of town because I'm worried that there's going to be a dirty bomb or something. And this was just a short while later. And I just thought, with the things that had built up and the reports from law enforcement that would catch people trying to get bombs in the United States. And it just seemed like it was inevitable. And so when it happened, I just thought, yep, I knew exactly who had did it, and I was right. I knew exactly what their ideology was, and I was right. Because, they'd been attacking United States for years and years. They bombed the World Trade Center a decade earlier.
Yeah.
So it just, and by they, I don't know if they're like a collective, but the interest of certain groups of people wanting to harm the United States or send a message to the United States. And also, I had a dream, and I don't believe that it was anything other than just coincidence, but I had a dream almost exactly a month before 9/11 where I was in a city, and I was looking up, and I saw a plane, a jetliner that was really low to the ground, and it was banking in a way that was turning toward me, kind of.
Yikes.
And I'm standing on ground level on the street, and I see this, 747 like lumbering overhead, toward me. And I look up, and I'm standing right in front of a glass skyscraper. And this 747 just goes straight into the building above me. And I felt rain. And it was the jet fuel.
Oh, scary.
Because in my head, I guess I thought jet fuel wouldn't automatically ignite the way that it did in 9/11, I guess. And so all this jet fuel falls down on me and everyone else. And I start screaming at everyone, like, you got to get...
Careful.
Yeah, you got to get out. You got to get away from any spark or anything because we're all going to go up in flames. And so I thought if I ran into the building and ran out the other side, I could get away from all the jet fuel. And that's all I remember. And
wow, what a stressful dream.
And it pretty, similar, but of course,
Yeah.
I don't believe that there's some kind of supernatural thing.
Well, you
there.
caused it, Kirk. You caused it.
Right. I think you said that the last time I said that. I talked about that dream. So, and by the way, just a little bit of dream research is that coincidences should happen. And when they do happen, you should say, yeah, that I was due for a coincidence, you know what I mean? With all the various coincidences, but particularly with dream coincidences. Anyway, point is that when it happened, it was just so, it was, I had to work that day as a therapist. And I remember just being in a total daze, trying to help people. And I remember seeing planes overhead and just thinking like, are they going to fly into one of the buildings and see? I thought that for months after 9/11. I thought, and every time I saw a plane, because often they sort of fly over downtown.
Right.
Because the airport is just south of downtown, and
they fly lower by that point for sure.
Right, and it always felt like, oh, is this the moment that it happens?
Yeah.
Because again, at the time, it just felt like the planes were falling out of the sky. Anyway, I remember that day, and I just remember seeing other people in their cars and thinking like, how are you just driving to work? And I don't know what they were thinking, but I just remember thinking like, how is life
continuing?
Just going on?
Yeah.
When it's happening today in New York. And I remember working with clients and being obviously really distracted, but it was those, and I don't remember any of the sessions except for this one session. I was working with a family, big family, lots of kids. And the kids were, like 8 to 14 or something. And I remember them not being impacted negatively by it all, but it was all the buzz because it was all in the news. And they were talking about how they wished a plane would hit their school so they wouldn't have to go to school.
Oh.
And I remember thinking,
my God.
I almost lost it, but of course I was like, well, they're kids. They don't understand. And then of course, soon after that, we had the anthrax scare, and it just felt like 50-50 chance I'm going to get killed by
some crazy attack,
by something like this. It just felt that way. In a similar way to when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, it felt like 50-50 chance I was going to get killed by a nuclear holocaust.
Right.
When we look back on that, it seems quaint. It's like, oh, you silly people of the 70s and 80s. But to people who think that, I say, you weren't there.
No.
It was real. Ronald Reagan called the USSR the evil empire. They had thousands upon thousands upon thousands of megatons pointed at each other at any given moment. And there were moments where we actually didn't know that we were on the brink of complete mutual annihilation because of some computer glitch. That it could have happened. It almost
and we're
happened.
talking about, by the way, computers.
Yeah. Well, and also humans.
But the computers of the time where it's like early computers.
Yeah. So I remember, so it was real and scary, and I would lie awake at night, as a lot of people of my generation did, just figuring like, when's it going to happen?
Yeah.
And we look back and we think that's quaint. And I'm worried that people will look back post 9/11 and go like, well, isn't that quaint that we were worried about that? But I want, for the record, people to know that it was an event. It was horrific. It was scary. The terrorists won. They got into our hearts and minds effectively.
Absolutely. And it changed everything.
Yeah. And I don't want that to be forgotten to history. 20 years ago is long enough. I worry that people will think like, well, what were we worried about? Or, that kind of thing. What was your experience, Berto?
Jeez. Well, so I was working, and we were just finished a product. Big project we had just finished. And me and a person that I used to be friends with, we are staying up all night because we are basically kind of doing the last preparations for finishing this project. And we are talking, and we're drinking some beers, and we're eating some leftover pizza, and we're staying up all night, like not partially. No, we're just going to pull an all-nighter. And it's crazy because we're talking about all sorts of things, and all of a sudden our conversation steers us into world affairs. And we start talking about how crazy it is that we are at such risk of, someone doing like a crazy despot or someone attacking us or a war breaking out. And then we started talking about potential, the potential for a dirty bomb. And we had these conversations.
So you caused it.
Yeah, I caused it. Exactly. And that was, I don't know, that was our conversation that night after singing songs, because we were also singing to all these 80s songs and everything. 6 a.m. rolls around. And someone arrives very early, and they're like pale. We're like, what's happening? Like, a plane hit the World Trade Center. And I say, oh, that's weird. Like, I totally underreact. I'm like, that's weird. That can't be right. Well, maybe it happened. It seems like a weird accident. No. Another plane then hit the other tower. And I'm like, what? No. And so we walk into a conference room, we turn on CNN, and we're like, what? We start watching. So this is at 6 a.m. So it's just happened, like, a few minutes before or whatever. But already the two towers have been hit, and they're like, smoke and fires coming out.
So you've been up all night.
We've been up all night. And we've just been talking about terrorism and world wars.
But it doesn't surprise
nuclear wars.
But it doesn't surprise me because it was
time, right?
It was in the air.
It was in the air.
9/11 didn't wake us up to something. It was
in the air.
It was something that we knew was going to happen.
It's true. And so, but we're sitting there in that conference room in kind of a delirium because we've been up all night. We've just been talking about this kind of stuff. And now, like you said, the arguably most iconic, other maybe Statue of Liberty or something, thing is up in flames. 2 of them.
So did you watch them fall?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Not only that, when the Pentagon was hit, we were watching CNN. So when the Pentagon was hit, me and this other person, and by now there were about 5 of us in the conference room, but the 2 of us burst out laughing. And like a couple of people were like, what's wrong with you? But because we could not believe what was happening.
How many are in the conference room?
Like 5 people. And to me, I burst out laughing because I thought it was like this moment of, okay, we're in a simulation. Like, this is not real.
Yeah, the Pentagon being hit was such a shocker because you just have all these visions of like Arnold Schwarzenegger with like, or Bourne Ultimatum.
They have lasers, right?
Yeah, they got missiles and lasers and they scramble
Apache helicopter.
They scramble the jets. And yet
you can't hit the Pentagon.
Yeah, you can hit the World Trade Center maybe.
Yeah. But not the Pentagon.
But not the Pentagon. That's
not the Pentagon.
That's arguably should be, aside from the White House, the most impenetrable place on the earth.
Certainly not right after 2 planes hit the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
Like, if that was the first target, maybe. Right. We were unprepared. Right. I don't know how, but we were unprepared.
Yeah.
But certainly at that point, we're on high alert.
Yeah, and just side note, whenever people like QAnon points out like that the government is this massive conspiracy, all you got to do is point to just moments like that and realize that the government is just a bunch of people that are not, just as incompetent as like Verizon or T-Mobile is, you know what I mean?
And are just arriving at work and the world's falling over, right? Yeah. So, and that's an important thing to realize, that the people that pulled this off had been planning this, right? So they know what's happening. Everyone else doesn't know what's happening. Right. I mean, granted, some analysts knew that something might have been about to happen, but the average employee at all these places has no clue. Okay, so there I'm sitting. We're kind of cracking up because we're starting to think, and I remember us saying this, if this were a movie, we would walk out right now.
Right.
That's bullshit. This can't happen.
Right.
Anyways, we're sitting there. And the full reality of what you were saying, like, everything has changed now. Because we're like, what is happening? Are we at war? And I had this other thought in my head. I had moved 10 years prior. 1999, 2000. Yeah, like 11 years prior, from a place that was essentially at civil war. and where they had bombed the equivalent of the FBI building and demolished it. It wasn't called the FBI, of course, but it was the equivalent.
What do you mean they demolished it?
Yeah, the equivalent of the FBI building in Bogota, it was called the Department of Automatic. I can't remember. But anyways, it was attacked with bombs and it was destroyed. Tons of people died. But that was only one of like the many tragic, crazy events. And I had gone through all that, but I thought I was safe. I thought I was insulated. So all of a sudden seeing this on TV and on such a large scale, I was re-traumatized. I'm like,
yeah,
oh God.
We're in the Pacific Northwest, which is arguably one of the furthest places away from New York in the United States. And we were terrified. Imagine being in the Northeast.
No, I can't. It's just, so I'm sitting there, all these thoughts are going through my head. And the same thing you were saying, we're like, wait, so we're supposed to like work today?
Right.
We're supposed to go and work today. I remember that day was very unproductive. A lot of us went out to lunch and sat there looking at each other just like, what the hell is happening?
Yeah.
And I really got into, I've talked before in the podcast that when the O.J. Simpson trial happened, I had this weird reaction to it where I got addicted to watching the trial on TV, and I would skip out on classes from college, and I was glued to the couch. And there was something weird about it, and I remember that feeling of, but wait a minute, he's clearly guilty. That was my perception because I had seen him run away in that chase. And so I thought, he's clearly guilty. Why are we even having a trial? And I understand it's a very naive notion, but I remember being like so confused about what is happening. Why is there no reality? Why is truth so elusive?
It's scary.
It's scary. I remember I talked to my therapist about this. Truth as a little child for me became very evasive because I was like, why did my mom leave? Why are my parents divorced? And I would ask my dad, why can't you just make up and get back together? And he'd say, no, we can't. But why not? We just can't. It doesn't work that way. But why not? So I think I had some trauma about like not having answers and truth.
And then trauma around violence and terrorism.
Exactly. So I had already...
And your solution, apparently, is to soothe your anxiety by news consumption.
Yes, exactly. So when 9/11 happened, I had the same problem. I would lie there on the couch late into the night, waiting for the next shoe to drop. What else is happening? What else is happening? And it was really weird and not healthy and scary.
Well, what was that like? Like, paint us a picture.
So... I would be back from work. We'd have like dinner. I had a roommate at the time, and we'd maybe watch, a show, but then I would turn to CNN and Fox and whatever was on, and I would just watch the news cycle, and then it would get later and later. It's like now 1 a.m. in the morning.
And they're just reporting
sleepy.
On like, so here's a shot of the rubble.
Yeah. Here's
an interview with someone who was ground zero.
No more truth. No more truth. There's no more truth to be had. There's no more answers.
Yeah.
Just more.
And what's going on emotionally for you? How are you feeling? What are you looking for?
I know that I wasn't self-aware at the time because I didn't really put this together till later when I was in therapy. But looking back on it, I was waiting for an answer as to why has this happened? And I was waiting for a solution, like what are we doing about it? And I was waiting for comfort, like don't worry, help is on the way, like it's gonna be okay. And I definitely talked to my therapist about this because so when my mom left me, she left me sitting on a little couch watching TV,
right,
with a little fruit. And I think there must have been a connection, like I'm on the couch, I'm watching TV, and this is the only thing I've got. It felt lonely and it felt scary. I was just like, even when I had my roommate next to me and we were both kind of like talking about how crazy it was, I still felt very lonely. Like, wow, and that lasted for, I don't know, like a year maybe, or I don't even remember.
Yeah. Have you been to the memorial in New York City?
I haven't. I went to New York City before they built the memorial, but after 9/11.
You saw the hole.
And I saw the hole.
Yeah.
And I went up in the Viacom building, and I talked to people that were in the building when it happened.
Yeah.
And they were describing like the horrific experience of seeing that happen.
I went to the memorial, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and it was amazing. It's essentially, well, how do I describe it? It's visually compelling.
Yeah.
It's a big space. It's not just like a little hallway, you know. It's got a huge, I can't describe it, but the most impactful exhibit is you walk through, it's not like a typical museum. It's almost like an experience.
Wow.
I think they got some of their inspiration from the Holocaust.
I was going to ask, yeah.
Yeah, because you think museum, it's like, oh, here's this display, and here's a video being played, and here's a memorabilia bit, you know, like a museum for...
And you hold those crappy little audio devices.
Yeah, you press the button. It wasn't anything like that. There was this one hallway that kind of meanders it, and you're kind of disoriented by what you're looking at, and then you hear these voices as you're walking, and you can only hear them if you're in a particular zone, and it's people leaving voicemails who are in the building.
Oh God. Oh.
They're just like, you know, hey, honey, I'm in the building and it just got hit, and I can't, the elevators aren't working, and I've been here for a half an hour. I've already seen the other tower fall, and I just want to tell you I love you, you know, that kind of stuff. And they have pictures of people jumping.
Yeah. Oh.
And it's traumatizing on a certain level, but I respected how they really went for it and said, like, look, this is what happened.
You got to know what happened.
Yeah. These are the people.
Yeah.
And you can't just gloss over that.
Yep.
And I don't know what you call it, but the memorial park that they have is very moving as well, and affecting. That's a beautiful park. And then next door, there's a fire department that you can kind of walk up to. And then, of course, across the street is the giant new World Trade Center. And it's this giant, interesting kind of looking building, and it just stands there in defiance.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say.
And like, and a symbol to American survivorship or capitalism or
both.
I don't know what. So then 10 years ago, almost, to this month, my friend, you met him, Wyatt. Mm-hmm. He went to Afghanistan. He was Special Forces. He died in Afghanistan 10 years ago. Special Forces. He was in his late 20s, I think, when he died. He's from a small town, Eastern Washington. Tall dude, strong dude, smart.
Special Forces material.
Yeah. Quiet, caring, fun guy, idealistic. He wanted to make the world a better place by helping the innocent. A big part of his job was actually training the Afghan army.
Oh, wow.
And working on, engagements alongside. So there'd be like a 50 Afghan army deployment, and then him and his like 8 other special forces would assist with tactics and optics and intelligence, and they were always trying to help get the Afghan army on their feet so that they could fight Taliban and other kinds of say what you will about the politics of the area, but for him, he thought he was making the world a better place, and he thought that it was just a matter of time before the Afghan army was strong enough and the Afghan people were progressive enough beyond fundamentalism and would allow for rights for women and democracy and all the things that we hold dear.
Yep.
And some Afghan Afghani people respect as well. Obviously not all. And he had been to Iraq, he'd been to Afghanistan many times, and had been shot many times. And he would tell me stories. I won't tell the stories.
He had been shot many times?
Oh, he had been shot once. He'd been injured once.
Okay, but shot at a lot.
But shot at a lot, and he had, he'd killed a lot of people too. It would take a lot to kind of get it out of him because, at the time it was late 2000s, right? So it's like 2007, 2008, 2009. The Afghanistan war was still kind of new, even though it was like 7-8 years old.
Right.
And I just wanted to know and he always had these really intelligent things to say about what was happening. Because, for me as a layperson, I'm just like, why are we over there? This is stupid. But he'd say, well, yeah, but da-da-da. And he would explain like all the different factors. And I just remember realizing that as a layperson, I had no idea what we were doing there, why we were there, what was actually happening, what was I, as a person who watched the news, I just was completely ignorant.
But you were also not helped by it's not like our leaders clearly explained in transparent ways what the heck our plans were.
Right. Well, because the populace are a bunch of idiots, and
so let's not give them the right information.
Yeah. Right. The things he would say that I was really quite convinced of, I just remember thinking, my God, this is complex. This is like way beyond, I'm guessing, what politicians even understand.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then
it's like in any industry where if you climb up the ranks enough, you start losing touch with in GE, they used to, I don't know if they still do this, but they used to have a rule that you had to spend X amount of time every year working a day or like working on the factory floors or like to like understand what the heck's happening at the ground level.
Yeah. So he had been there many times. He'd been injured. There'd been all these scares and others had died. And then I got the call this one day that he had died. He was helping some Afghani soldiers and a RPG went off above him, hit a wall. His what they call teammates explained this whole thing to me, and because he has all this armor on, but the shrapnel went through his where his clavicle is, like from above, where you don't have any armor, and went straight through his heart and his lungs and everything.
Oh, brutal, man!
And he died right there, and it was awful.
The only hope is that it was instant.
Yeah. And I wondered about that. And I would ask his buddies about that who were there. I was like, was it fast? Because it seems like it would have been. Yeah. But I never got, or at least I don't remember getting a very firm answer. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe it's hard for them to tell. But anyway, then I was close enough to him and his family that I went to all the memorials at the base. I went to the memorials in his hometown in Eastern Washington. I was with the family. I was with the teammates, as they call them, the other military guys. I was there through all of that stuff. And then like months later, his like best friend in the military, his like main other special forces guy, died in a motorcycle accident.
Oh my God.
He was, I believe, driving recklessly. It's just as my speculation.
Yeah.
But driving recklessly in a back country at the middle of the night, I think, out of, toying with death, I think, because of the grief. That's the story I tell myself. I don't know if it's true, but there, there's so much I could say about these military guys, because the way that they lived, it was this vacillation between several extreme states. They'd be deployed where there'd be long stretches of boredom and then extreme moments of terror and death.
Right.
And depending on your brothers to, essentially kill on your behalf. You know, you're not just doing a mission, you're out to kill, you know, and it's us or them kind of a thing. And then they'd come back to the States, and a lot of people didn't even know we were over there.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like World War II where everyone knows we're at war. There were whole swaths of Americans like, we're still in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
They just don't even know. And so there's no, there's no parade. There's no interviews.
It's like, where were you? Oh, I was deployed in Afghanistan. Oh, cool.
Yeah, and the best depiction I've seen of this, from what I understand, is from Hurt Locker when he comes back and he's going through the grocery store, and there's the Muzak playing, and he's like looking at cereal, and he's just like,
what is this?
This is so surreal, right? And I got the impression and the way that they coped with it was to be brothers stateside as well, and they lived together, roommates and stuff, and they partied hard.
So I wonder if there's also a correlation between one of my best friends in life is in Colombia. I don't know if you met him when you were there, Juan Miguel. I don't know. I don't think you met him. He was special forces in Colombia back when he served. And at the time, that was almost kind of a death sentence, because it was when they were fighting Pablo Escobar and the whole 9 yards and the FARC. I liked everything. But he volunteered to be in the special forces. The service was mandatory, but he didn't have to volunteer for special forces. But he wanted to. And he did the
service
whole thing.
So if you had stayed in Bogota,
I would have had to serve. Well, it's lottery. Lottery, yeah.
What's the percentage?
And it's pretty high.
Like 50%?
Something like that, yeah.
Oh my God.
A lot of people had to serve.
Wow, I never thought about that. If you would have stayed another few years, you would have been in the military.
Oh, I could have easily been in the military and could have easily died.
Wow.
Yeah. So he served. He volunteered to be in the special forces. He went through the whole thing, and then afterwards he worked as a bodyguard. He worked as and he rides motorcycles and he paraglides. He takes a lot of risks.
Right.
And I've always wondered about, and he got in a lot of fights, like afterwards, you know. So
yeah,
like if there's like some weird correlation, is it cause or effect? You know?
I think it's both. I think that, on average, if you're more of a thrill seeker, more of an extreme sports kind of person, and frankly, a lot of young dudes are like that anyway, right? Then you're more likely to want to be a part of the most elite military force. Because, I mean, even the training stories that Wyatt would tell me were like, there's this one story where they were training on parachuting. I don't know what you call it, but parachuting into a war zone, and you would have to pull your ripcord at the last possible moment because you need to
just enough to not die.
Yeah, because it was nighttime and you're trying to be stealth, you know, and so the whole team jump out, and they have an instructor, a military instructor, and they all jump out together, and Wyatt's his ripcord wasn't working, and so he went to his reserve and was trying to do that, and it wasn't working.
Oh my God.
And you don't have much time to go, and my hands are sweating just telling the story. Yeah. And he's on his back going down, and 2,000 feet, 1,500 feet, and he's like, well, I guess this is it. And the instructor comes like flying in and grabs him, wrestles with his ripcords, pulls the chute.
Oh my God.
Just before the last possible moment, and lands. It was we would tell this story, sometimes, and he, an hour later is at the mess hall or something, with everyone, and he's just sitting there kind of chilling out, and his superior comes up to him, just like, Wyatt, like, dude, like, I heard what happened. Yeah. Like, how you doing? And Wyatt's like, huh? It was like, I heard that your chute didn't work and the instructor hit. And Wyatt's like, yeah, well, it
happens.
It all worked out in the end.
Jeez.
That's a different
Whereas
kind of,
you and I would be like, for years,
yeah.
like, oh my God, I can't believe I barely survived.
I'd start a podcast called like Parachute Ripcord Problems or something. And so and then and also
sorry, I'm thinking, my stories. I'm like, and then I got pulled over by the cops, and oh my god, and then I thought they were gonna tow the car,
and then there was floss in the toilet. Yeah. Did you lift the flap? And but then of course when they would come back, it was stuffing emotions.
Right.
It was pain, it was loss, it was trauma, and a lot of drinking. Just a lot of booze. And
right.
because I dragged you out sometimes when he would come to town and we would go out because he lived in Tacoma because the base is down there.
Yep.
He would come up to Seattle, and then I don't know how many times did I drag you out with me and with
I don't remember enough.
I remember there's this one time that I think about him. We were at that old bar on Capitol Hill.
Oh yeah.
And someone put in Mr. Brightside over and over again.
Was it me? Maybe. I hope not.
Do you remember that?
I love Mr. Brightside. I do remember that. Yes.
Yeah, and we were playing pool.
Yeah.
And we probably ended up at Neighbors or something. Anyway,
that was a fun night.
Yeah, I think I have video from. Anyway, point is lots of partying, lots of drinking. And lots of, they would play games where they would kick each other in the stomach as hard as they could and see, like as a game of chicken, essentially.
Sure.
And they would kick each other hard in the stomach.
Right.
I
used to do that, punching your arm, not you, but it was like, okay, we're going to punch each other's arm and whoever gives up first, right?
Yeah.
But kicking the stomach is a step up from that.
Yeah. They would tase each other for fun.
Okay, that's geez.
Kind of thing. And it was a lot of machismo. It was a lot of love.
Yeah.
It was a lot of pain. It was a lot of live in the moment because you don't know if you're going to have any more moments. Yeah. It was a lot of uncertainty. And anyway, so I wrote a song for Wyatt that I thought I'd play right now. Because he died 10 years ago, and it has to do with 9/11. Because he signed up because of 9/11, and I don't think he was going to be in the military before that. So the lyrics are pretty clear, but the last line that is that I went there. The military burial at the cemetery was we got there, it's the general is there and all, the full military, all the people and all the family and friends and everything, and we're driving to the cemetery, this long procession, and there's all these people on the side of the road saluting, and you have firefighters with their engines and all, just this huge. The whole town of Colville, Washington, which is north of Spokane, pretty desolate out there. But anyway, get to the cemetery, and it's a nice day. And as they're, walking up, the military guys are carrying Wyatt's casket to the grave. It suddenly starts to rain like nothing else. Oh, like sideways rain, just. And this is the middle of the summer. Yeah. Which it doesn't rain out there very often. Spokane is pretty dry. Yeah. That area. And everyone is just getting soaked. Drenched. And the military, and there's all these speeches being said, and I can't even hear what's being said because of the rain. And the military guys are really in the rain. Yeah. And they have to be very stoic, right? They have to stand at attention without making any move. And I just remember watching, because all of us were, we're huddling and complaining, and these military guys are just standing there like it's not even raining. And then we get him in the ground, and then the rain stops. And the thing about Wyatt and all of his friends was they had a very morbid sense of humor, and I think this was said by, his friends, was that he probably did that to troll everybody. Oh, okay. You know what I mean?
He called the rains down.
Right. So that's what the last line has to do with it.
I see.
Wyatt, please please, why'd you leave? Is it true you were alive? Where'd you go? Was it fast? Was it to let out a sigh? Did you laugh at the rain as it filled your grave? He gave eternally to live eternally. He gave eternally. He volunteered to come alive. Anyway, it goes on
That's
from
beautiful.
there. Let's take a break, and when we get back, I want to switch gears and talk about the man who caused 9/11, Osama bin Laden.
Okay.
And talk about who he was and maybe why he did it.
Let's do it.
So, Berto, do you know anything about Osama bin Laden and his psychology?
Only what's known. I mean, I know that he came from a very wealthy Saudi family, and I know that he was sort of our ally back in the time when Russia was fighting in Afghanistan. And I know that he was, he had firm beliefs about what he thought was right and wrong. And therefore, he saw, at least this is what's publicized, he saw the U.S. as an enemy, no longer an ally. If everything is to be believed, he was clearly a very smart planner and a very, 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 very dedicated warrior to their cause. And unfortunately for us, that, seems like our target, we were the target. And they also planned something that was more effective than they probably even imagined. That said, that's where my knowledge ends. Everything else is myth. I've seen the videos of him talking. I've seen the information about his death, but I don't really know much more about it.
Yeah, before prepping for this episode, or while I was beginning to prep, I had this weird feeling that when people do weird things, like if there's a mass shooter or something, there's usually a question by some people of, well, why did he do it? What was the cause? There must be some kind of reason for that. Like, you don't just shoot up a mall for no reason.
Right.
There's got to be something there. But when it came to Osama bin Laden, for some reason, I don't remember anyone ever talking about that. Like,
no, it was verboten, because I remember, in fact, it was seen as like, that's the wrong question. We need to go and get revenge. We need to make this right. But who knows why they do those crazy things?
Right. I think it was more that. It was more...
Well, they're just crazy terrorists. Who knows why they would do anything?
Because everyone...
They hate our freedoms.
Right.
They hate us. Remember? They hate us.
Right. It's their religion or their culture. And
that was the other one. It's the religion.
Right. Even though 90.9999% of everyone of that religion would never do such a thing and has never done such a thing, somehow it's, just written in their Bible that they're supposed to kill Americans or something. And it just never, I just don't remember, and maybe I was out of the loop, but I don't remember anyone ever saying like, well, what kind of psychological problem must someone have to dedicate their entire life to trying to kill millions of people, or trying to affect, millions of people in a negative way? It just never. Now, maybe that's not the only question. I know that's not the only question that should be asked. Other questions need to be asked too. Like, well, why do a group of people want to kill us? What are we doing as Americans to other countries, both militarily and economically and colonialization wise, that's causing them to dislike us? When people resort to violence, it's usually because they asked nicely many times before that.
There is a part of this that I never quite could understand, because maybe I'm too naive, but if I am to believe the videos and the propaganda and everything, they seemed very organized and smart to a certain extent. But the thing that I never understood was like the end game on their end, because certainly they must have anticipated that there would be a war response, and they obviously weren't prepared. Like they certainly weren't ready to like fight a war, and so I kept thinking, so maybe it was that they really just wanted the psychological damage. Well, that seems so sophisticated, though.
But to me, that was my whole ignorant layperson point of view was, can we just ask them what they want? Because I'm pretty sure we'll do something along the lines of what they want rather than having to live in fear this whole, like, is there kind of a treaty we can we reason? I mean, are they looking for us to be out of a certain country?
Which they did, right? They said, step 1, you got to remove every American presence from all our holy lands, right? Step 2, you got to stop siding. I mean, this is not verbatim, but like, you got to stop siding with Israel, right? And then there were other things too. But I think that's still weird to me, like, because it wasn't like, I don't remember
because it had
getting an ultimatum
right
as a country, like, here's your last chance, here's our list of demands, if you don't do this, bad things will happen. Now maybe they didn't do that because then we'd be on high alert. I don't know, because the CIA guys were saying that we should be on high alert because that's what they were saying.
Now, of course,
I don't know
what Wyatt and others would tell me is that's the simple perspective. The behind the scenes are, you have warlords who are trying to get power. You have groups of people who hate each other for long-standing reasons. You have resource grabs. You have political grabs. And in the same way that some politicians in our country will just arbitrarily target another country for jingoistic reasons and to get votes, there are other politicians, or other leaders in other countries that will do the same thing, that will scapegoat the United States or whatever as a way of, raising the flag and getting votes and getting power. So there's all these systemic reasons as to why these things happen. But anyway, I just find it interesting that I've never heard anyone do a psychohistory on Osama bin Laden until I came across this write-up by Colin Ross, which it's titled 2015, titled "A Psychological Profile of Osama bin Laden."
Interesting.
In the Journal of Psychohistory. And for those of you interested in psychohistory, because I know a lot of you are, like, why was Hitler the way he was, or that sort of thing, you can subscribe.
Because of his secure attachment, remember?
Well, so let's look into it. All right. So 1957, born in Saudi Arabia. His parents, father Muhammad, and according to Islam, and most of this info is from Colin Ross, by the way, with my speculation sprinkled in. Father Muhammad bin Laden, according to Islam, a man is allowed to have 4 marriages, and many wealthy Saudis had 3 permanent wives, and then they would rotate in a 4th wife.
Oh, rotate in. Like, I see. Like, we're sticking to the word of the law, not the intent.
Right. So they would marry these 4th wives and divorce them and marry and divorce and marry and divorce.
What? I only had 4 at a time.
Right. His mother, one of these rotated in 4th wives, Hamida, was his 11th wife. So it would have been like his 7th 4th wife, right? Wow. She was 22 from Syria when she married him. And she was more westernized than the other women in her society and in the family. She was defiant, progressive, and independent, according to Colin Ross, and thus was ostracized by the larger family, by the other, the other wives. And she was sent away. By the way, Muhammad, so Osama bin Laden has 53 siblings.
Okay.
And Osama is somewhere in the middle. So his mother was sent away. Now, and of course, the father has 54 children and, dozens of wives. So
spends a lot of quality time with every one of them.
So Osama, abandoned by mother for reasons out of the mother's control.
Oh, he didn't go with the mom. Okay.
Right. So the mom was sent away, but Osama stayed.
Oh, geez. So
abandoned by father.
Yeah.
bullied by his siblings and stepmothers because he was considered like the black sheep because the mother was considered the black sheep. You know, the mother was seen as like this decadent Western, terrible, sinful, and they called her like the slave, and they called him the slave's child, the slave.
Oh my goodness,
the slave boy.
Chip on shoulder.
Right. So he's alone, he's scared, and he was reportedly shy back then. So my speculation, again, chip on shoulders, you're saying, is a constant sense that he's unlovable, no one's there for him, people are against him, and that probably encouraged him to develop avoidant attachment, which you've heard me all talk about before, in which you turn off access to your emotions and subsequently also your empathy for other people. And why should you care about other people? You've been abandoned by your mom, your dad, and you're in a den of lions that are trying to get you. You can also develop defensive narcissism of I'm in it for myself. Who knows? But it's possible that he developed narcissism defensively and had a grandiose vision of his life for the future, a secret grandiose vision for his life, and a need to assert his superiority in a noticeable way. And when you're bullied and you feel alone, a bastion that some people will turn to is a secret superior fantasy. Who knows? There's no evidence that he had that, but we could see the possibility of that given what he got himself into later. Because it's one thing for someone in his society to hate Americans or to have political views that are a little extreme. It's another thing to like actually take actions later in life to, materially enact your hatred of other people. You know what I mean? You could develop schemas in his situation. He's abandoned by mom, abandoned by dad, in a den full of bullies, that the world is against you and you have to defend yourself all the time, that you feel superior, and that you might want to get revenge. Other events that might have shaped his psychology is that his father was really into religious debate. And Osama spent a lot of time as a child in his room reading about religion, reportedly. So speculation, he might have been trying to get his father's love from a very distant place. I mean, again, imagine being a middle child of 54 kids and you're the black sheep.
See, I can't.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to me.
And you are trying to get your father's love.
Yeah.
And I know he's really into religion, so maybe if I get really into religion, and I see this happening in families all the time where kids will, like, you'll have a family where the dad is in prison and the kid misses his dad. Yeah. And he turns 15 and he starts committing petty crimes because of a subconscious urge to bond with that. Or another event that would happen occasionally for him is that the father, Muhammad, would take a lot of the boys camping in the desert. And they would ride horses and camels, and they would sleep in tents, and they would shoot guns, and they would cook on the by the fire. And it was in the desert, and it was in Saudi Arabia, I believe. And it was this fun time. And for Osama, he shined in this environment, probably because he was desperate for his father's attention, but also maybe he just took to that sort of thing, and he rode well, and he became kind of a leader. And so speculation, who knows, that during these times he felt he could get some self-esteem, that he suddenly, for the first time in his life, was able to have some self-respect. Like, look at me, I'm good at something, and I'm getting attention from my dad. And what are the elements of this? Roughing it, being in the desert, riding horses, riding camels, shooting guns, being a leader. It seems like it might planted a seed. He had a lot of losses in his life. Obviously, his mom and his dad abandoning him. Father died in a helicopter crash when he was 10. He had a best friend, a Saudi prince, who was his best friend when he was, in grade school. And around this time, the prince rejected him And so he lost his best friend, felt rejected in all likelihood. And his brother, who was very Western, one of his brothers, and married an English art student woman, lived in the Western world, very rich family, obviously, so they lived all over the world. And he died in a hang glider accident in Texas, by the way. Wow. So just the, Bush connection, just kind of a random. And speculation, another reason to hate the United States, the decadence of the United States killed my brother kind of a thing. Who knows? We'll never know the answer to these questions, but you could see some themes there. 1973, age 16, he goes to a fancy boarding school near Beirut, and this is closer to Westernization at the time. There are bars, there's strip clubs, there are prostitutes, sex workers, and he became a decadent Western playboy.
Oh, I didn't know this.
In his seniors, yeah. Drank a lot, spent a lot of money, strippers, sex workers, got into fights, reportedly drank a lot, actually.
Okay.
Spent time at ski resorts with his Christian girlfriend. He was...
Wait, what?
Yeah, he was just a regular 16-year-old fancy rich boy.
Yeah.
Drove nice cars.
What year is this?
The early 70s. So he's a teenager.
Wow.
And a lot of his brothers were doing the same thing, by the way, and a lot of his friends. The Saudi princes. The stereotype, right? 1977, he turns 20, and he had a number of years of partying hard, and he went to Mecca and had like a religious awakening, and he turned away from the quote-unquote Western life. He became very religious. And so my speculation, Berto, you might be able to relate to this, is there are times when the partying kind of takes its toll, and you wake up one morning and just say, I'm not doing this anymore.
No mas.
Yeah. Tell us about that feeling, Berto.
Well, unfortunately, I used to have that feeling often. I mean, there is a difference, though. There's the, you wake up after a night of a lot of drinking, you're like, oh God, I'm not ever doing that again. But there's kind of a different level of it, which is, I'd say that it's not the day after, but for me, there was a realization at one point about the danger I would put my body in and myself in as a result of my behaviors. And so over time, that became more of a, there's certain lines that I need to be careful not to cross. And it's part of growing old too, I think, and also having enough damage happen, like not literally just physical damage, but also emotional damage, broken relationships or friendships or just even close calls or things where you look back, you're like, wow, something really bad could have happened.
Yeah. So imagine also you're desperate for your father's love, even though he's dead, but you want his approval.
Probably the family's approval.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And society's approval, maybe. You feel like you're against your religion. Because in our cultural pocket in the United States, to be a young college douchebag and drinking all the time, the alternative is just to be kind of like, you kind of drink every once in a while instead of constantly a lot. So the contrast for Osama was, I can fall into religious fundamentalism quite easily, right?
Right.
And there's a world there, a savior, and we see this happen with some people will become sober, clean and sober, and they will turn to religion and they'll become extremely into it. Yeah. And it's not a bad thing. People say, oh, now you're addicted to AA or addicted to religion. I'm just like, it's not really an addiction if it's good for you. You know what I mean? You're into it, but it's not a destructive force necessarily. And so I'm just imagining, again, I'm just reading, and it's hard to know what someone was going through, but he's 20, lots of years of partying, probably a lot of self-hatred, I'm guessing, because of the way he was treated, a lot of drinking, trying to find himself.
And it would be hard to differentiate among 54 people, right? Yeah. Like, I this is part of the thing that's so hard for me to understand. I have one brother. And we are super competitive with each other. And we're always trying to differentiate. I have one brother.
Yeah. 54 is like a small town. You know?
Don't understand what it would be like when I am one of 54. Of course, but if you can actually become the most pious, the most whatever, that's a way to differentiate.
Right. So here's my main speculation is that he again, this is really just shooting in the dark, but it's a possible explanation. He would have to be here for us to bounce this off him to see if this was accurate or seems accurate, and it's basically psychobabble to begin with, so there's no way to prove any of this, but there's this thing called splitting that was developed by Genet and in the late 1800s. And
yeah, I saw that movie. It's M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah. So when we split as children, when we're very young, infants and toddlers and young children, we have a hard time with gray zones. We have a hard time with nuance. So we either see things as all good or all bad. You have you have Frodo and you have Sauron. You have the Republicans and you have Democrats, whatever your flavor of choice there is. You can only see good. You see bad. Mommy is good, and that dog across the street is all bad.
Right.
Mommy is all good. Doggy across the street all bad. Instead of mommy's good most of the time,
right?
But sometimes she's not so great.
And the dog across okay, but he has been known to bite.
Right. The dogs across the street is kind of scary, but I'm sure the dog's good. And so we think that way because we're unsophisticated when we're young. We don't understand things yet.
Right.
And because of our lack of sophistication, and our lack of, it's not only do we lack the sophistication to understand nuance, but we also kind of depend on a lack of nuance to help us cope, because as we are, and this is all psychoanalytic developmental theory, is that as you're 2 years old and you go to your parents and they're there for you and they pay attention to you and they feed you and they cuddle with you, and it's just like you're as a child you need that so badly, and so You're going and your parents they listen and they're there and they're safe and they protect you, and you just bask in the wonderfulness of the safety and the goodness, and then daddy says, it's time to go to bed. You can't watch that TV anymore. We're going to have to turn off Frozen and you're going to bed. Well, as a kid, that's devastating.
Right.
We tend to look at 3-4 year olds, when they're throwing a temper tantrum as like, it's kind of quaint. It's like, it's just Frozen.
Right. You'll get over it.
You've watched it 50 times. You've watched it as many Bin Laden kids as there are. And it's fine. And sometimes they are manipulative kids and they're ramping it up as a way to get their way. But often it is legit devastation.
Right.
Because they can't comprehend time. They don't understand I'll be able to watch it tomorrow, or it's not that big of a deal. Like life will go on. Sometimes they're disappointed. They can't cope with that. So it feels horrible. So in their mind, in this moment, they have to look at their parent and say, my parent is the enemy. My parent is evil.
Right.
My parent is out to get me.
Darth Vader.
My parent is completely ruining my life for no reason. I don't understand. Why can't I watch the rest of Frozen? My older sister gets to stay up. Why can't I stay up? Right. It just becomes a complete decompensation of your world, and you can't cope with that as a child in a number of ways. But one of the things you have to reconcile is, well, how do I look at daddy if he is both all good and all bad?
Right.
Well, this is what we call splitting. So the children will split. They will actually see dad as two different people. There's beautiful, wonderful dad. And then there's
horrible, evil dad.
Then there's evil dad. There's the good witch of the north and the evil witch of the west. There's Luke Skywalker and there's Darth Vader, or there's Darth Vader and there's Anakin.
Yeah.
And we children actually will interface with each of those objects in completely different ways. Because children, they'll get violent with you sometimes when they're upset. They'll hit you. They'll kick you. They'll scream. They'll spit in your face. They'll grab at you. They'll pull your hair. And if they were bigger, you'd get messed up.
Yeah.
But when they're 2.5, it's quaint.
Yeah.
But in those moments, they're rageful. They hate you. Yeah. They'll even say so. I hope you get run over by a truck.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not jokes. You know, the kids, because all of the times you have disappointed this child are now coming back, you know, and you are the evil daddy. And then the next day, they're fine. And how can they do that? Well, it's because they've put aside the bad daddy. And now you're good daddy. Now you're good daddy. Well, if everything goes well, you integrate and those two objects, the good dad and the bad dad, the good mom, the bad mom, where it's the same person.
Right.
You can see how, and it's a little depressing because good daddy is so good and so safe and so wonderful and all loving and all there. But to graduate to a more mature level, you have to accept that good daddy has bad dad qualities.
Right.
That's kind of shitty, you know, it's kind of sad, kind of depressing. But you don't have to have this notion that there's an evil dad. It's just like, he's just disappointing sometimes, you know, or he's a kind of a human being. He gets overwhelmed sometimes. Anyway. So if everything goes well, you integrate the two, but in order for things to go well, you have to have contact, you have to have attunement, you have to have love, you have to have practice, you have to have examples. If you're neglected, you retain sometimes this splitting mindset. You not only retain the mindset of black and white and all good, all bad, but you also retain the defense mechanism of splitting where you actually cannot reconcile good with bad.
Right.
So you will idealize some things and 100% dehumanize or devalue another thing. And yourself is wrapped up in this as well. So it's not just your parents, but because you're undifferentiated as a child, everything reflects on you. So when good daddy is paying attention to me, then I am also all good. Daddy is all good and I am all good. And there's nothing wrong with me and there's nothing wrong with daddy. Daddy is disappointing me in this moment. Daddy is all bad and I'm all bad.
Right.
My life is falling apart. There's nothing good about me. There's nothing good about him. There's nothing good about my life. There's nothing good in the world.
Right.
And that's the 2-year-old mindset. And we expect that black and white. But if you're not attuned to enough or you're abused or abandoned or something,
that carries over.
You can be 25 years old or 20 years old and still feel like there's a version of me that is all good and there's a version of me that's all bad. And I hate the all bad part of me.
Yeah.
But I am glorious and I am wonderful and I am the savior. I'm the savior of the world. But I hate this. You know, this I'm describing narcissism. But there are other versions of this. You know, there's actually a borderline version of this where the romantic partner or the attachment figure is all good, and then as soon as there's a mild disappointment, it's all bad. And so again, speculations upon speculations. Osama bin Laden had at least a version of this and split into Islam and fundamentalism is all good, and as the West or even Russia, you know, just everything outside of the Islamic world is all bad. And I need to destroy the all bad and I need to elevate the all good. And I can only exist as an all good person, you know, in the same way that the child, the 2-year-old wants to be with the good dad so that the child can feel good about themselves. The splitting adult might want to absorb the idealized fundamentalist culture so that he can feel like he's good, and he needs to attack the bad.
Right.
Because that by contrast defines the good. Anyway, am I making sense?
Yep, I get it. It's basically a version. It's a little bit like we think back of memories that left an imprint when we were kids, and I've talked a lot about like little moments that happened. One of the moments I've talked about is when I was so upset that my grandma finished a little Lego house without me.
Right.
And I destroyed the house, right? Well, I can now look back on that moment and understand all the nuances about it and feel bad and happy and sad and all that richness of that. But in the moment, grandma was all bad. I was all bad. The house was all bad. The world was ending.
Yeah.
And if I had carried that forward and I couldn't distinguish, that would be very
it's a good
dangerous.
example. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. So, hopefully 10 years later, you come downstairs or you walk into the house and your grandma has worked on the Lego thing or some other thing that you wanted to do. And you'll feel a little tinge of disappointment.
Right.
A little like, oh, I am being stepped over. I'm being ignored. My needs aren't being heard. I'm being left out. And I feel hurt. And I know my grandma's a good person, but I also know my grandma can be a little short-sighted and maybe even a little neglectful of me.
Right.
But not entirely. In this moment, she's letting me down. In this moment, it's a mild hurt. But, what's the bigger picture here? What do I say? How do,
and now as we're talking about it, I think for the combination of things that went into my head, I struggled with that quite well into my adulthood, because those feelings of feeling left out and things like that was something I had a hard time dealing with. And I remember distinctly that it's only been like maybe the last decade that I finally started being able to be okay when I was left out. Moments where I'm like, oh, I wasn't invited to that. Okay, that's okay.
So in the splitting linguistic system, when you're invited and involved and included, they are all good and you're all good.
Yeah.
But when you're excluded, they are all bad and you are all bad.
Yeah. Not every aspect of my life did I have these kinds of issues with, but certain ones I did. And being left out was definitely a pain point for me. Mm-hmm. And I remember even in my 20s, like something where maybe someone set up a movie thing and 3 of my friends went, and then I find out that they went without me. And this isn't something that happened frequently, but if it did happen, I would feel so betrayed or something, And the explanation was super trivial. It's like, oh yeah, well, because we were eating and then we were like, hey, let's go do this. You weren't there. But in my mind, I'm like, this is like really egregious. Like, and even with even simpler things, like they started to cook without me, or they started a thing without, like something was started without me. And then I remember how I would actually do things that I would have hated. For example, me and Mitch, we were collaborating on a song, and he went to bed and I stayed up and I worked through the night and I finished the song by myself. And the next day I showed him the finished work and he was like, oh, cool. But
so 1979, he's a devout fundamentalist Muslim by this point, and he's, 22 years old. Russia invades Afghanistan, and there's this movement of like, we have to help Afghanistan from the imperialist colonizers of USSR and Russia. And so he goes to Afghanistan. And this is when you really say, whoa, there's something different about this guy. He is essentially one, degree off of a prince in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
Millions upon millions of dollars, can do whatever he wants, doesn't have to work for the rest of his life. His father is dead. He has inherited a bunch of money.
Right.
So he doesn't even have to please his dad anymore. He can just sit back like probably hundreds of other dudes in his cohort. And instead, he goes to war with Russia.
With Russia. Yeah.
With the USSR.
In a country that's not his home country.
In a country that's not his home country. In the mountains of Afghanistan, which there's a reason why no foreign colonial power has ever been able to tame the mountains of Afghanistan. It's because it is terrible to live there or to travel there if you're not used to it.
Yeah.
And so he goes to Afghanistan and brings his money and his resources and his know-how for camping and the U.S. comes to him and says, among other people in Afghanistan, and says, you are our ally.
Right.
You are
enemy of my enemy.
You're my brother. We are here to help you. We believe in freedom. We believe in helping the underprivileged. We are the saviors. We are going to give you money and intelligence and weapons. And Osama bin Laden and the United States at this point are, dependent on each other, best friends. I mean, to be at war to have allies in war is one of the deepest relationships you can have. Imagine you're in the mountains and you get a supply dump from the United States of food, and how important that would be. And if you're United States and you just depend on the Mujahideen,
Muad'Dib.
No, yeah.
Mujahideen.
Yeah, there you go. They, it's mutual respect and kind of like love in a sense, and attention, again, total speculation, kind of like a father.
Now question, because we don't know for sure, and we probably never would know which came first, chicken or egg, unless we know for a fact, but I don't see how we would. Because it's also possible that the CIA recruited him because they profiled him and they're like, well, we could use this guy.
Yeah. Well, even if that was the case,
before he went to Afghanistan,
even if that was the case, he clearly was ready to do something.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So he has meaning now. He has purpose. Not only is he, and the speculation that this author, Colin Ross, makes is that he's always trying to get his father's love.
Yeah.
I did a psychohistory of Donald Trump a while back, and Trump has emotionally a similar story.
Yeah.
His father was never around, and when he was, reportedly by people in the family, he was distant and potentially off-putting. He encouraged fighting among the siblings. And Donald was kind of like a lost child because he's one of the
dummy.
He was one of the later born kids.
He's the dummy.
Yeah. And then, but all that happens later. So Donald is born and he gets a year of his mom. And reportedly his mom was pretty cold and not such a great parent. She was nice, but she wasn't like very loving. Then Donald Trump's mom became extremely sick, almost died giving birth to Donald's younger brother, and is in the hospital for a year. This is back in the 50s or I don't know, 40s, I guess a bit in the 40s, when you just went to the hospital and disappeared. Like there wasn't a lot of visitation. And so Donald was raised by his older sister, I think the federal judge one, who, didn't really care about taking care of her younger brother. Right. Because she's without her mom and dad isn't around anyway. So she doesn't have a lot of resources to give. So Donald is fed, but not loved. Yep. So Donald, from 1 to 2, has no mother and no father. Jeez. and has an older sister who is basically just feeding him. That is going to take an emotional toll on you. Ooh. And that is going to make you potentially develop a schema of I'm worthless. I need to assert my dominance to have some kind of self-esteem. And I'm going to have a dad complex where I'm going to be constantly trying to impress him by driving forward at any cost.
Yeah.
I will mow over anyone. I will bulldoze anyone or anything to reach the goal. And I'll never get to the finish line because I'm never going to get my dad's
and
love.
Especially in that business context of his dad's,
Right.
Like he's a big, successful business. I'll become the best business guy ever.
Yeah. I will become the most religiously devout person on the planet. I will dedicate myself to one of the most desperate causes on the planet for my religion. And maybe I will get the love of my father, who has died, by the way. Again, total speculation. Yeah. Who knows? 1989, 10 years later, Mujahideen.
Oh God, we're terrible.
Expelled Russia from Afghanistan, and the U.S. just walked away.
Yeah.
They just, okay, good. That's all we cared about.
Right.
We didn't really care about Afghanistan. We didn't really care about, Osama bin Laden.
Now they're our friends. They're our allies. We have allies for life.
We just don't want Russia to have access to warm ports. That's all we care about. We're just trying to, it's just self-serving. And so total speculation, maybe Osama bin Laden's like Father U.S. because at this point, U.S. is like a dear friend in the same way that to Saddam Hussein, the United States was a dear friend, a savior, really. And Father just up and leaves, just disappears, drifts into the mist, and now you're abandoned. Okay, fast forward another year after that, 1990, Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. And I find this to be really interesting that 1989 is when Russia withdraws from Afghanistan. And then in 1990, a year later, is when Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. To me, those things are way further apart than they are actually. The Saudis were terrified that Saddam Hussein was going to invade Saudi Arabia because it's right there. Then they have this huge border to Kuwait and Iraq, right? And Osama comes in and says, hey, I kicked out Russia from the Afghanistan.
Right.
I can bring all my warriors.
You can certainly kick out Iraq.
And we have another cause here, and so we got to go after Iraq. And by the way, Saddam Hussein, another ally of the United States prior to this. And so he offers the royal family to drive Saddam back, and he's rejected. Probably because they're like, we don't think you're going to succeed because, you're mountain fighters against tanks and all this other stuff. But anyway, he's rejected. And instead, the royal family of Saudi Arabia goes to George Bush and says, please help us. Again, total speculation, another feeling of rejection, another feeling like you're being left out. You don't have a purpose anymore. You've won the war. I can't remember the saying. There's some saying of like, what do you do with the generals after after the war is over? We've created monsters that have this, that are so beloved and needed during time of war, and then as soon as the war's over, it's just like they're a monster. They're a walking disaster. Maybe that was Osama, because what do you do after that? Does he go back to Saudi Arabia and study history? Does he start a business? His purpose in life is to expel the oppressors. That's where he got his self-esteem.
And then instead he sees the U.S. Army blowing up fields and doing things and attacking on quote unquote their soil. So then it becomes the cause. It's like, get out of, especially Saudi Arabia, because that's where a lot of our troops were stationed. And I didn't know that aspect that he offered help.
I know.
That's key.
Right. So fast forward 1999, by now he's back in Afghanistan, back where he feels accepted for the first time in his life, maybe.
Right.
He's beloved. He's a hero, a national hero to Afghanistan. And the Taliban by now is controlling 90% of Afghanistan. And then we have the, emerging ideas of attacking the United States. And then 9/11 happens. I mean, I'm fast forwarding through quite a bit, but
it is also interesting that the, maybe it's because of his connections and everything, but so much of it came from Saudi as well. So anyways, so this paints a very interesting picture, which is because I knew about the complaints, but I didn't know about the psychology behind the complaints.
Right.
That's fascinating.
Right. When you learn about, because look at you, right? You were abandoned by your mom at the age of 4. And just think about how many aspects of your life were colored subconsciously by that experience. For example, your spending compulsion. Yeah. We rewind the clock back and we're asking 25-year-old Umberto, like, why are you buying that thing for thousands of dollars? You'd be like, because I need it. Like, you wouldn't say, well, because my mom abandoned me when I was 4. Like, you just say, well, this is who I am. Yeah. You're asking me to do something that isn't who I am. This is the meaning of my life.
In fact, I was self-righteous about my decisions.
Right.
Like, you could see the same zeal, right?
Yeah.
The same kind of zeal we're talking about.
And a denial system that upholds the coping. Yeah. Because it's all you have. Like, without that spending compulsion, you have nothing. You don't have anything to do to pump up your self-esteem. Right. And or other, you don't have, aside from other few, destructive things.
Which is interesting. There's also another connection that I just made was that there was always something bad happening when I was growing up. There's always something bad happening. So I probably became uneasy when bad things weren't happening. So like going to work, nothing bad happened. I got money in the bank, nothing bad is happening.
So what would you do anything to cope with that?
No. But I think the way to cope with it was
Distraction.
I need to make something happen. I wouldn't call it something bad, of course. I wouldn't say, ooh, nothing bad is happening, I better go cause bad problems. No, instead it was like subconsciously I'm like getting antsy and something needs to happen. Yeah. Something needs to happen.
Right. Who knows, but the speculation about that is we feel more relaxed when we're in control of the self-destruction than when the destruction comes from the outside and it's unpredictable.
Right. So if we have Osama bin Laden sitting there going, okay, I took back Afghanistan. They rejected me. I guess I'll just chill out.
Right.
Oh gosh, I'm antsy. I'm anxious. This is not, something must be done.
Right. I know there's an injustice that I need to fight, and
then you get self-righteous about it. You make the reason make sense.
Right. And people come to him and be like, I don't know if this is the road to go down. And he now again, this whole time he's a massively rich, privileged person, and with probably a lot of yes men. You know what I mean?
Oh, and people like us, and I'm not putting myself in the same boat, but I could be convincing to both to myself and others in the moment. Not to you, probably at the time. If you had met me, you might have, well, I don't know at that age, but certainly I could make arguments that would sound convincing as to why I was perfectly entitled to do whatever I was doing.
Right. So when it comes to people like you and me, we can have that speculation pretty comfortably. But when it comes to someone like Osama bin Laden, we're like, but we can't, it's not the same thing, right? But I think it is the same thing potentially. And there's a lot of speculation that we have to, do in order to even have a conversation about Osama bin Laden's factors. Right. But I think it's there. Now, I want to be clear. This isn't to justify, this isn't to let him off the hook. If any of us, regardless of why, cause murder and mayhem and terrorism, that's on us. We're responsible for that, and the buck stops with us. But I hope if you listen to this podcast, you at least hold the idea that our behavior as adults aren't entirely divorced from our childhood schemas and complexes.
Absolutely.
So let's get into some research here on 9/11. I read many, many articles, and there's a lot of research on 9/11 and psychology and social psychology, but here are just some highlights that I found to be interesting. Main long-term effects, psychological effects of those directly or indirectly involved with 9/11, like people in New York or first responders or military people. You have prolonged grief, you have complicated grief, you have PTSD, obviously, you have depression, anxiety, and lower life satisfaction. So I feel like that just should be mentioned, but I think it's obvious. Berto, question, percentage-wise, the prevalence of PTSD among individuals who were directly exposed to the World Trade Center events, like tower survivors, first responders, residents, and local workers. So people right down there at ground zero. Percentage of those people who had PTSD years later.
I'm going to say 60%.
It's different studies show different figures between 5% and 29%. So pretty big range there.
Big range, but also much better than I would.
Yeah, well, it might help to understand that to qualify for the full-blown diagnosis of PTSD, you've got to have some serious symptoms. If now 60% of people might be affected,
right.
might have some trauma reactivity, but not full-blown. I mean, full-blown PTSD is debilitating. Yeah.
Okay.
There was a study that found that mothers who were pregnant during 9/11 had signs of biological stress and parenting issues, and that the kids were affected by those biological things. Many studies showing that after events like 9/11, where there's some kind of attack like this, that there's a strong desire for revenge. So they will, in the lab, have they'll prime someone with like, there's an earthquake in your town, and then ask questions around like, or they'll do a lab experiment where they'll be like, oh, someone took something from you. How badly do you want to take something back from them?
Right.
And they find that there's a much bigger signal of revenge motivation, regardless of whether or not it makes any logical sense. And all these studies are trying to make the point of, why did we invade Iraq? But we have a bias, we have this, need, and I don't know if it's exactly related, but if I drop a tool on my foot, I want to punch something.
Right.
Why? What good does that do? And I think it's that satisfaction of, if I'm wronged, I'm going to wrong someone else.
And I do think that there's a difference between
and I don't care who it is, whether they're related to it or not.
Right. I think there's a difference between preventative measures versus revenge, right? Now, they could overlap.
Right.
Like, for example, you might say, this person just killed someone. We need to put them in jail for the rest of their life. And many people might be like, yes, revenge. But it was also a preventative measure for society. And so those two might overlap. So I think sometimes, though, we go overboard in our desire for revenge.
Yeah. And before we get emails, Berto and I understand the problems with the prison system. Berto fully understands it. So, we understand that, for example, being caught with weed a few times doesn't justify 15 years in prison. Nope. And that when you disenfranchise particularly groups of people with harsh prison sentences, it causes them to have economic strife, which causes them to create more reasons to commit crimes and drug abuse, and just is a cycle that goes on.
Yeah, the example in the reaction to 9/11 is, I think we sort of had no choice but to go to Afghanistan and see what we could do to quell the cells that were plotting things like 9/11.
Right, because the idea was, and I'm not an expert, and I remember Wyatt talking about this, that there were militant, organized, well-funded groups in Afghanistan that were under the protection of the Taliban, who were absolutely in connection with the attack on 9/11 in the Pentagon. I mean, just imagine a group in Afghanistan manages to attack the Pentagon and New York City. We're going to do something about it. Whether best case scenario, the Taliban does something and offers them up, but they weren't going to do that.
Now, we didn't do all the smart things we coulda, shoulda, woulda, because, like, for example, one way to defund part of the problem would have been doing something about the drug trade, because that was funding a lot. Another way would have been to go after the Saudi money that was flowing, and so forth, right?
However, and by the way, I'm not saying it was justified. I actually don't know. I'm not an expert. That's not my area.
But what I'm trying to get at is, but then you start overreacting, and you're like, well, now we should also invade this other country. Now we should do more. Now we should go years and decades.
I mean, so a very simplistic way of describing the Iraq invasion was, you're on the playground and a bully walks up to you and pushes you down a hill, and everyone laughs at you. And you get up and you go to the principal and you tell on the bully. And the principal's like, okay, well, I don't know. I'm hearing two different stories. And you're frustrated, and you walk out of the principal's office and you find a smaller kid and you push him down a hill.
Yeah.
That's essentially the one way of looking at what happened.
It could even be another bully, by the way, because certainly there were bullies in Iraq. But that wasn't the bully that pushed you.
Right. You just walked outside. You're frustrated about one bully, and you just walked outside and pushed another person down a hill.
Yeah.
Singh et al. 2020 study found what percentage of World Trade Center exposed New York City rescue and recovery workers screened positive for PTSD the year following 9/11.
So if it was 5 to 20, I'm going to go 30%.
10%.
Okay.
So bad.
Yeah.
10% of a population experiencing PTSD is
really bad.
Is rough. Light et al. 2019 found that after 9/11, the sentencing gap between citizens and non-citizens widened significantly in the New York area. So prior to 9/11, 36% of those sentenced in the U.S. District Court were non-U.S. citizens. And by 2010, non-citizens made up 48%. So there's this, it's hard to know because it's not a causal study, but it's possible that because of either anti-immigrant or xenophobia happening, or just a bias, which I'll get into later, about when we feel like our tribe is being attacked, we have this bias of anti-foreigners. Yep. Even if it doesn't make any sense. It's like, it'd be like Japan bombs Pearl Harbor and we hate Canadians. What I mean?
Right. And it also could be, so, because it could have been at the judicial system, but it could have also been at the policing side, right? Like more people could have been being rounded up.
Right.
That were foreign.
Which I remember very well. I mean, I remember after 9/11, like, so I didn't talk about this part of my experience with 9/11. So right after 9/11, after the dust kind of started to settle, I thought, because Paris marched for us. Right. Russia cried for us. Colombia cried. The world cried for the United States, for Americans.
Right. For a second, people had empathy for the U.S.
For a second, we were the sad kid who was pushed down the hill, and everyone loved us and felt
normally we're the bully.
Normally we're the bully, and I for the first time I felt like people like us.
Yeah.
And I thought, now is the time that we have to capitalize on that by not acting like a fucking bully.
Yeah.
We have to be the safe people, the pacifists.
Right.
The good kid, the kid who rises above and says, I'm not, I'll turn the other cheek. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna strike back with all the might of the military and these really ridiculous. I'll be the smart, powerful kid on the hill. And then as soon as we started talking about invasion, and particularly as we started invading, we were right back to everyone hating us again.
Of course.
And I just remember thinking, what an opportunity lost. Because I also thought, if we're liked and we act like pacifists, or at least careful with our military, then these terrorists don't have a reason to kill us.
Well, they don't have as much propaganda they can use.
Right.
Yeah.
But if we invade, it just is we're making their point.
Iraq became the biggest recruitment video of all time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, timely in the news right now, we pulled out of Afghanistan, and all the news is like Taliban's taken over.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, it's again so complicated because I think there was clearly some broken telephone happening at our leadership here, because I'm not saying about the decision to pull out, but the expectations that were communicated publicly were so unrealistic.
Like Taliban's not going to take over.
No, the scenario where, Friday we pull out, Monday they've taken over, that could never happen. Like literally that's what happened. So I am very disappointed in someone didn't listen. Once again, this happens all the time, because I guarantee you there were people all throughout the organization probably raising flags saying, here's the risks, right? At the same time, like my initial reaction when I heard about the mess was to go, how could we fail so badly? Then as I looked more into it and I listened to Biden, I listened to more, I was like, okay, we definitely screwed up both our understanding of what was going to happen as well as our messaging. But what was our plan?
Right.
So what were we going to do?
Right. So that, and of course, my friend who died in Afghanistan, like, why was he there?
Right.
Why did he die? Was it completely meaningless? Not only trillions of dollars that you and I spent of our money on that war, but also all the death of Americans and the death of Afghani people. The bad press around the world of us occupying another country, causing another generation of terror or people who hate us in Afghanistan. Like, what are we doing? And 20 years later, it's like, well, we just left and it just went back to the way it was. It might even be worse. And it's Vietnam all over again. And have we learned nothing?
Well, and Vietnam didn't necessarily have a bone to pick with us directly, whereas they now do.
Right. I mean, anyway, so it's just a, but then I wonder, well, why were we there in the first, what was it in a similar way of Vietnam? Was it ever achievable? Was it, because our mission was to democratize and to kind of westernize.
Well, but it depends who you talk to, because I heard some military analysts that were there at the beginning and stuff, and they made some cogent points about how, look, our mission, from their perspective, was to go and neutralize these cells and prevent another 9/11. And to their point, we haven't had a 9/11 in 20 years. Now, the problem is, of course, now what happens, we don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
So mission accomplished, maybe?
For 20 years. And you could also argue that for 20 years, progression was happening in the for Afghani
right.
people and women specifically.
Right. So that's maybe the silver lining of like, maybe in another 20 years, it'll bend towards justice for women and other kinds of things.
Because maybe they've tasted
right.
a better reality and now there's enough internal
is that
rebellion.
Just us, putting sunshine up our butt or
No, I mean, I'm not being optimistic about it. I'm just saying, because we like to be very relativistic. Well, different societies and stuff, but I can't, because my religion, if you will, is that I lean towards like constructive rather than destructive. And when I look at a society that treats one half of its society as an inferior, I think, that's destructive. And so to me, it was definitely a net positive for women. Well, I don't know, but maybe there was a seed planted there, maybe. And maybe that's going to cause a lot of strife and civil war, but maybe they can come out on top in the end.
Yeah. All I know is that I'm confused. I'm sad. I'm potentially angry about my friend dying for no reason. I'm mostly upset on behalf of his family and people really close to Wyatt who are asking these questions because when Wyatt died 10 years ago, there was still, and maybe more so, hope that there would be some long-lasting positive effect on the society.
Well, I think a lot of us had come to believe, I certainly had, that Iraq aside, Afghanistan, we at least had done some good.
Right. And so when Wyatt died, it was like, well, he died for a good reason.
Right.
And seemingly. And Wyatt would have agreed back then because he talked about how he might die. But now we have to say, did he? Was it worth it? Was any of the action worth it? So for me, I have to say yes, because it's like this. The whole thing about a terrorist criminal comes up and says, if you don't do blah, I'm going to kill these people, right? And then you stand your ground and then they kill the people. And they're like, because of your actions, those people died. It's like, no, because of your actions, Mr. or Mrs. Terrorist, those people died. And that's the reality. Like the whole scenario, aliens come down. If you don't sacrifice a child, we'll kill 1 million humans. Like, well, we don't sacrifice children for you. Well, we'll kill 1 million humans. That's on you. It's like, no, it's on you, evil aliens. And we stand our ground on these facts. And so we could look at it like we failed. Like, well, maybe. But at the same time, we're not the ones taking over a country and essentially impoverishing the culture of part of that population or maybe the whole population. We to some extent, we might not be able to do anything about it. There is a different way we could have approached it, which was actually trying to really take over the country and incorporate it into the United States and have and that's a whole other mess, right? And people would have hated us for that. And so I don't know that there was a way to permanently solve this. I think the hope was, and it didn't pan out, that we had planted enough seeds that would have prevented an immediate takeover. That clearly didn't happen. But maybe the seeds are there and it'll just going to take a long time.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't see it as a waste. I don't think I will not.
Yeah. Well, so tougher bluff, Berto. The 9/11 attacks were the deadliest terrorist events ever, or the deadliest attacks on ever to occur on U.S. soil. Tougher bluff.
The deadliest attacks
most killed.
Most killed? 3,000. I don't know how many died at Pearl Harbor. So I'm going to go bluff?
Tough. More than Pearl Harbor.
Okay.
So 9/11 was about 3,000 and Pearl Harbor was about 2,400.
Okay.
And we don't really have many other attacks. Japan attacked the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. I don't know how many people they killed up there. But we have so many people, but so few events where people are attacked on our soil.
Which is why it was so shocking.
Right. Which should put in perspective other countries, like China and Russia and Japan and Germany and Poland, and
where their attacks are in the millions.
Yeah. So it's like our two worst events are 3,000 and 2,400.
Yeah.
Not to say it wasn't bad, but it should give you some perspective on the multi-generational traumas that other societies are experiencing. So I want to...
Oh, sorry. Silly us imperialists. I will make a small point here. The biggest casualties on American soil are probably Native Americans.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But in a single event, I don't know if...
Who knows? I don't know how many were killed in any single event.
Yeah. I mean, the Civil War, for example, killed hundreds of thousands of people, but
it was internal.
But like right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right.
I don't know.
Before we get emails, thank you for... Yeah, I want to talk about terror management theory developed by Ernest Becker in 1971. Essentially, the idea is that we're interested in self-preservation, as most animals are, and the difference about humans is that we recognize our death is inevitable, and so we are faced with a desperate need to survive and a desperate understanding of our death.
Okay, so a question there, because it's a metaphor version of it, because clearly animals have the instincts to avoid the peril at all costs. I mean, not always, but So, but for us, there's not only those instincts, but then there's all these superset of like language and culture and things about it, and about what it means to lose our families, and it means to lose our memories, and it means to lose our...
Well, the intermediary factor there is that by a certain age, we have the cognitive ability to abstract from all the data that I am going to be dead one day.
That's a good point. That an animal is aware, at least instinctually, in the moment about the threat, but they're not sitting there going like, I'm going to die someday.
They're not sophisticated enough to know, or sophisticated enough to kind of wrap their mind around the idea.
That we know, right? So some animals might, like dolphins, chimpanzees, others might.
Yeah, I don't know the research on that, but humans definitely, if those more advanced animals have a slight notion of that, they definitely have a notion of others' deaths.
Yeah.
Chimps, when they have a tribe member that dies, they definitely understand that person is dead. That my buddy or my mom or my child is dead, and they understand, they exhibit similar things of humans, like where they grieve and they wail and they spend time with.
Yeah.
And so they definitely understand death, but do they extrapolate from that and say, so I'm going to be dead one day?
Yeah. Like what I don't know is like clearly, well, I don't know clearly, but when you watch cows, right? Cows are not aware that not only are they seeing their fellow cows disappear day by day, but they're going to be taken and killed, right? But in the moment they get like panicked because they're like, what's happening? I'm in threat. I'm in threat.
But do they know that they're going to die?
Yeah, we don't know. Yeah. But I wonder, like in a commune of chimpanzees, if if they saw the writing on, like, yeah, it's impossible.
But again, even if they did have a slight notion of it, humans definitely
yes.
have a lot.
And they write poems and songs and books. And
we have
drawings and
so
art.
much knowledge of our death and not
create whole stories about what happens after the death.
So that's what terror management theory attempts to explain. It's a model of understanding. It's managing the terror of the existential threat that is exhibited by religion and the afterlife and art and trying to establish meaning and legacy. Chimps probably don't care about passing on the family name. Humans are, especially in some societies, really interested in like having a family name or having children who feeling like, one of the things that you'll see in humans is like they'll have some problems with infertility, and you think, well, why don't you just adopt? And certainly some people do, but a lot of people are like, but I want the baby to be mine. So we have the idea within terror management theory is that immortality, there are many ways to immortality, and that is a way of us coping with the knowledge of our death.
Yeah, you could imagine some advanced civilizations getting to a point where they have consciousness, they have civilization culture, but they're unable to guarantee that the majority of their citizens don't fall into nihilistic despair about the realization. Because we have members of our society that do. They fall into nihilistic desperation. They are some of the killers, that go on rampages and things, where they get to a point where they're like, nothing matters. I'm going to die. Like, I've had conversations with people that have that perspective. It's like, nothing matters. We're all going to die. I'm dead anyways, But lucky for us humans, a majority of humans don't fall into that constant pit of despair day to day and just keep going. Mm-hmm. And you could imagine other types of advanced civilizations that could have sprung up and didn't have that for whatever combination of factors, and then they die off because...
Yeah. That, or every civilization causes a runaway greenhouse effect and everyone burns up in a fiery mess. But so there's been some research on this terror management theory, Burke, Martin, and Foucher, 2010. In this study, they momentarily make death salient in the participants' minds. Mm-hmm. They somehow have a way of reminding the participants that they're all going to die. They ask people to think about themselves dying. They prompt them. It's like, think about when you're going to die. Okay. And then it magnifies positive reactions to those who uphold cherished cultural values, as well as negative reactions to those who oppose such values.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So they prompt the participants, think about your own death. And then they ask them a bunch of questions like, how do you feel about the American flag? Yeah. How do you feel about freedom? How do you feel about football, American football? How do you feel about Ford trucks or whatever?
Right.
American pie. How do you feel about Muslims? How do you feel about foreign flags? And they find that compared to the control group, for those people that think about their own death are much more, precious about their cherished cultural values and much more hateful just by the prompting of your death. So when you have a terrorist attack and all of a sudden all of Americans are contemplating their own deaths, we see what we saw.
Right.
Greenberg et al. 1990 study found that Christian participants had more favorable reactions to fellow Christians and had less favorable reactions to Jewish targets when they were thinking about their own deaths. American participants had more favorable reactions to the author of an essay praising the United States and more negative reactions to the author of an essay critical of the United States. So when we're not thinking about our deaths, we're more open.
Right.
We're more like, well, maybe there are other points. And these, the important thing of these studies and this theory is like, it's not connected. These things aren't connected. For some Americans to be like, there's a terrorist cell in Afghanistan that attacked us. I don't like Afghanistan anymore. I want to attack it.
Yeah.
There's at least some logical connection there, but whether you agree with it or not. But what terror management theory and all these studies are showing is you just thinking about your death makes you potentially want to invade other countries. that have nothing to do with the fact that you're threatened.
Yeah.
And hence Iraq or
even
hence the wall.
Right, exactly. Like, okay, we were attacked on 9/11. Terrorists want to hurt us. The people south of here are now evil.
Let's elect a jingoistic,
Yes.
xenophobic person who talks about crap countries.
Yeah.
Yay. Another thing here is the accessibility of implicit death thoughts increases when cherished culture. So it goes the opposite direction too. So this is what's so fascinating about this research, is that when you have a threat to your cultural belief system, so say like you're an atheist and someone's like, we're going to make atheism illegal or something, then you start thinking about death more often.
Right. That makes sense. That is why that definitely helps explain why.
Even though atheist being illegal wouldn't mean you're going to die.
That helps explain why you see people being interviewed about, hey, what do you think of the latest policy or whatever? And instead of saying something like, I think there's a lot of angles to that, I personally don't agree with these aspects, or you see something like, that's going to be the end of us. The thing I knew is gone. Yeah. It's these death
right,
words.
Exactly. And you hear that, and as an outsider to that cultural pocket, you're like, what are you talking about? Like, I and you are both mixed-ish. I mean, it's what you mean by mixed, but like, we have white and brown in us.
Right.
And we are the future. And I remember in the 80s, there was this picture that they came up with of like the typical American 100 years from now. And I was like, that's me. You know, it's like you're a little brown. You know, you're not totally brown. You're just kind of brown.
And that probably terrified people.
So for me, I was like, yay.
Yeah.
I'm at the...
I'll live forever.
I'm at the chevron of a movement to take over the world. But to white people and maybe other races, it's a threat. And I remember hearing people say like, we have to preserve our race at any cost. And I'm thinking, why? They're still your descendants. Just because your great-grandchild has a darker tint doesn't mean it's not your great-grandchild.
No, but it makes sense because you have this way to realize like, okay, I am going to die, but I live on because there's constancy to the way of life.
Right.
And so I wake up in this village and I look around and there's a hut. We go to the same river. We hunt the same things. And when I die, and this is all subconscious, when I die, that will continue.
And this is why...
my child will continue.
This is why, I don't know why I think of my childhood of the 70s. So I remember learning this idea that it's ideas that bind us as Americans. It's not race. It's not religion. It's not culture. It's ideas. Yeah. Ideas of freedom, ideas of democracy, ideas of fairness, ideas of justice. That will survive. And so stop focusing on the color of skin.
But it's hard because, so take Moana, which is one of my favorite movies. Why was the dad so terrified to the point of death, right? Because the song they sing, it's tradition, it's our mission, you know? And in the song they sing, they talk about all the things they do day after day for generations. And we're going to put your rock on top of this other rock, and it'll continue on and on. And as soon as someone, in this case Moana, threatens that thought, like, wait, we're running out of fish. We might need to look away. We might need to disrupt tradition. It's not, well, let's talk about it. That's death. That is death.
Right.
And it's so fascinating. You're right, because it doesn't make rational sense, right? You're like,
and it causes us to do so many stupid things as a society, especially when we're all collectively terrified. And the next time this happens, and it will happen again, we need to be rational and listen to the psychoanalysts like me. Anyway, I'm joking, by the way. The other piece of research here is, and I won't go into full detail because we ran out of time, but there's a whole article by Lankford 2018 that looked into the 9/11 attackers, because there's this in terms of their psychological profile, you know, because there's all this talk of like, how can you find people that will go on a suicide mission? These people must be suicidal already, right? And then there was all this talk of like, nope, these people are, you know, they're not suicidal, they're not depressed. These people are like mentally resilient people who make a choice and based on their belief system or brainwashing or whatever. And that was the answer. It was like, no, we don't need to look into the psychology of these people. And there's also, I believe, kind of a bias of like, well, people in the Middle East don't have mental illnesses, right? You know what I mean? It's ridiculous,
Right,
but I feel like a lot of...
It's a Western problem.
Right. I feel like Americans have it's sort of like imagining a man with an eating disorder. Like some people have a really hard time wrapping their heads around that because it's not depicted very often. But of course, men do have eating disorders, and people in the Middle East do have mental illnesses.
And clearly, it's not like 100% of the people that join these organizations blow themselves up.
Right.
There's a percentage that they convince that that's the thing to do.
Well, so it's chicken or the egg there too, that people who are attracted to these kinds of missions might have something different about them, might have a mental illness like schizophrenia, or a thought disorder, psychosis, delusion, suicidality, depression. And the brainwashers will have an easier time recruiting those kinds of people and will prey on them because they're more isolated and more prone to thought problems.
Well, and kids from those parts of the world grow up with a lot of the same traumas.
Right.
Like think, like Uganda. Why are there so many young child soldiers killing each other? There must be some genetic problem in that part of the world that they're all psychopaths.
Yeah.
Or they're all traumatized the same way.
Right.
Because they're all traumatized the same way.
Right. Where life means nothing and survival is...
And their parents were traumatized the same way.
Right.
Yeah.
But what Langford found out doing a lot of investigation into the 9/11 attackers, many of whom you would interview people that knew them before they died during 9/11, or you would go to Guantanamo Bay and look at the psychology, assessments, is that a number of these attackers, if not most of them, had serious mental or signs of serious mental illness. Yeah. Psychosis, full-blown schizophrenia in some people, or like low-grade schizophrenia, depression, suicidality, substance use disorders.
Interesting.
And, and that's just one of those things you just don't hear people talking about.
No.
Like maybe one way we can fight terrorism is to provide mental health services to certain areas of the world.
So I wonder if the same study was done with cults. Like if you would find a similar thing.
The other thing, like QAnon people are just like, how do people believe that Hillary is a lizard person and that they're lasers? And every time I hear that, I'm like, have you heard of psychosis? Because there's a lot of people on the psychotic spectrum in this country, a pretty sizable percentage, and they're prone to this kind of way of thinking. Right. And when you give them a venue to justify their thought problems, and there's lack of a system that will help them get treated, then you get what you have, and there's this idea that somehow people who have schizophrenia can't march on Washington. They can march on Washington. People with schizophrenia who are in the full, or bipolar, psychosis are in the throes of a massive episode. They can march on Washington. They can go online. They can even run for office and get votes. Like they're not, we don't put them in an asylum behind a fence. You know what I mean? Like it's out there, and we need to have a way of helping people like this so that they don't hurt themselves and hurt society in these conspiracy ways. Anyway, not all people with schizophrenia. The vast majority, in fact, everyone that I've known who've had a psychotic disorder would never march on Washington and try to hurt anyone, so I'm not saying that. Anyway, so a couple other things. I know we're getting long here, Berto, but I really feel like we need to get into some of these things.
Yes.
Two more topics. One is why do terrorists attack the U.S.? And I'm just going to race through this. Psychoanalytic speculation. It has to do with humiliation trauma. And I remember hearing about this a long time ago, and it kind of making sense to me. I don't know if it's true because I'm not from these cultures, but there's this idea, and this goes way back to, early psychoanalysis or mid-century psychoanalysis, where we would, in the United States, we'd be treating people, and we'd, Heinz Kohut would identify narcissism, narcissistic rage, and humiliation traumas, this kind of thing. But in a nutshell, the idea is that as a child, when you go through a lot of humiliation, that your healthy narcissism is being attacked. Your healthy self-aggrandizement is being, we all want to like ourselves. We all want to think that we're good at things. And when we're humiliated, it is a trauma to that narcissism, that healthy narcissism. And so we will strike back with what they will term as narcissistic rage. It's often misunderstood on the internet, but essentially it's a defense against the humiliation. And so I'm going to yell at you. I'm going to attack you. I might even punch you in the face for humiliating me because it's the only way for me to get my self-esteem back. And so the idea goes is that certain areas of the world who in history might have been at the forefront of technology and science and military are now not. And they're being colonized. They're being walked on. They're being laughed at. They're being left behind in economy and in technology and in military and in the world stage. And they feel humiliated.
Yeah.
They feel like they're being stepped over, like they're being ignored. And there might be a motivation to strike back, to say, I am important. I am strong, and you can't ignore me. And so I'm going to do something to you because that will give us and my group of people, I'm not saying everyone in the Middle East, I'm saying, maybe a cultural pocket of a cell in Afghanistan or whatever. And that could be one among many factors, including the United States doing horrific things in an imperialistic way, that could contribute to this vilification of the United States and wanting to attack it. What do you think, Berto?
Yeah, I mean, I remember growing up in the 80s, we would have, there was this sense where we had this love-hate relationship with the United States in Colombia. On the one hand, especially my generation, we really looked up to the cultural aspects of like the music and the movies and the styles and the fashions. And we copied it and we wanted it, right? We wanted all that stuff. But at the same time, we made fun of gringos, right? Gringos had, gringo humor was stupid. Everything was a pie in the face and dumb. Gringos were generally dumb. They were tall, lumbering, blonde brutes. Like, they're just dumb. And so like when we'd have a gringo character in a soap opera in Bogota, in Colombia, they were kind of dumb, They were lovable, but dumb. And at the same time, well, the U.S. had helped Panama gain their independence from Colombia, so I'm sure there were bitter feelings there. The U.S. had companies that would exploit workers all over the country and take resources, and this was not new. And all of Latin America had that feeling of like, God, this bully up north, But so there was this kind of push-pull, and there was a feeling of, we have been humiliated, and so we need to humiliate them. So we'll make fun of them in the way we can, which is we'll kind of poke fun at their culture.
Right.
But we'll still, at the same time, have an obsession with the culture.
Right.
So it was very dichotomy, like in the head about it. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So possible factor. All right. I'm going to end with a study that was looking at the survivors of 9/11, people who had family members die, by Bowen's 2017. And they looked at themes. They looked at a bunch of studies and they looked at themes of what people said. And so theme number one is a shared tragedy and invaded privacy. So let me just give a quote from someone. Mine's a public loss. I don't get to grieve privately. I had no private. I would open my mail and there's a picture of the towers with a plane going through it, or the towers collapse. We didn't have private grief. There's no such thing as private grief. It's a public thing. And there's more quotes there. Theme number two is notifications and bodily remains. This is rough. By the way, trigger alert on this because this is. We got a total of 6 body parts.
Oh, jeez.
4 times we had to open the grave. The first time, and then 3 more times. One of the times was just in March. We just got another this year. Yeah, we just buried another piece of him. I couldn't believe we were doing it again. A week later, we got a call. A week after it was in the paper saying they were done identifying. We got a call saying we got another piece. Oh. So just imagine that, Berto.
Oh, no.
Right? Because you want to honor the peace of your father or your husband or something.
Yeah.
You don't want to just like say, well, just throw it away. Like, so you got to dig up the grave.
So imagine your relative died in a car crash, and everywhere around town, the picture of the car crash is everywhere.
Right.
And it's on TV, and not that day, not that week, for decades.
Right.
And like you said, every now and then you get a new package in the mail with, it's just so horrific.
Yeah. Theme number 3 is persistent grief. Someone says, I don't think anybody finishes with one phase and goes into another phase. You just keep going back and forth. You have days when you really feel so depressed and crappy, and then there's other days you can be upbeat. So that's another theme. Number 4 is relationships, secondary changes and losses. Quote, my friend said, ugh, I can't stand to listen to all this 9/11 stuff anymore. Like, enough already. Let's move on. And then she goes on. I couldn't maintain a friendship with her anymore. It saddened me because I guess she didn't understand the complexity of what my emotions were. Theme number 5 is comparative and marginalized grief. Quote, yeah, I felt marginalized. I felt, like the siblings were forgotten. So this person was a sibling of someone who had died. Like the siblings were forgotten, the forgotten ones. It was always about the children. How are the children doing? How are your parents doing?
Yeah.
This is my brother. I grew up with him 36 years,
Yeah. Wow.
Theme number 6, taking action. I went and spoke before the New York State Assembly last month, and I had my statement typed. I made a copy of that. So anyway, it's just another theme that they would take action. Number 7 is financial compensation. And people that meet me say to me, well, you're well set for life. And I'm like, I said, no, I'm not. I said, I haven't worked in 3 years. Do you know what 3 years of not working, how much money? So anyway, they're talking about how because some of these people got like money.
Yeah, right.
And they're like, my life isn't better. you know. Theme 8 is 9/11 related supportive groups and services. So they're just talking about how they go to different support groups. Theme number 9 is remembrance. A quote here. I wanted the story to be known about this beautiful, bright woman, and I wanted to remove some of the pain. So that's another theme. And then the final theme is growth and new perspectives.
I'm surprised that one of the themes wasn't the people questioning whether it even happened. Because, so I have a friend, an ex-coworker.
Oh, well, I see what you're saying. It's like people saying, like the Alex Jones thing of like...
It was very prevalent at the time and even now actually probably more than ever.
Yeah.
But I have a friend who knew, do you remember the famous story in one of the planes, the guy was on the phone and said, let's roll, and then they took down the attackers, and I think that was the Pentagon plane, or it was one of the planes.
Well, no, it was the...
it was the other plane. It was the one that fell in
Pennsylvania,
the field. Yeah. A friend of mine or someone I know knew that person. And told me about what an amazing human being this person was, and how he was totally not surprised that was his attitude in that moment, and that's totally what he would have done, right? And I remember later having a brief conversation about how incensed he was hearing people saying that all these people were not real people and that they were all actors and all these things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so there's that trauma too. Like, not only did you lose your friend, your family, whatever. Now all of a sudden people, same thing with Columbine and all this. Like, now all of a sudden people are saying, or was that
Adam Lanza, the
little kids,
the Connecticut.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And then people going like, yeah, no, it didn't happen. It's all actors. It's fake.
Your child that you lost, that's dead, you're faking it.
Yeah. So that happened to 9/11 victims too.
Yeah.
And their families. I mean.
Well, anyway, so lots of pain from people who died, obviously, people injured, people close to the people who died, all the way to you and me who were very peripherally involved, but yet hurt.
Deeply affected psychologically.
Yeah. And to this day, I can't imagine who I'd be without that event.
Yeah.
It was so life-changing, and it's been 20 years. And what's your final word about it, Berto?
I can't believe it's been 20 years. And when I look back, I think, wow, there's a journey there as a society, as a world. And then, so the only thing I really hope that there were seeds planted in Afghanistan so that things weren't a complete waste. And then for us, man, are we that we would be able to go against our natural instincts the next time and, you know, be fair about how we respond to the world. I don't know.
Yeah. For me, I'll just speak directly to y'all who are listening right now, whether it's 9/11 or some other societal fear or just a personal fear, a fear that you're not going to fall asleep tonight, a fear that you're going to get cancer, a fear that your parents are going to die, a fear that your kids aren't going to be happy or something. You know, we live in fear all the time. And when we're alone, we suffer greater. When we're together, we're afraid, huddled, but together.
Yeah.
We can't get rid of the fear, I don't think. We can't get rid of the stakes. We can't get rid of political strife. We can't get rid of war or killing. We can do what we can. And obviously, just we're not supposed to give up. But what I can say is, in the moment right now, we can be together in our fear and in our appreciation of each other and in our understanding of each other. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.